Hey everyone and welcome back. Hope you're having a great day. Today we are going to be continuing the class review series with the Warlock. Yeah, this is going to be an interesting one. To keep it brief, right? It's a real good class, but it certainly is one that has its drawbacks as well as a few balance issues. All three DPS specs are, I think, very fun in their own way. They all play very differently, so it is hard not to like at least one of them. Now, we're also going to preface today's class review with the real important part of being a warlock, right? You do bring incredible utility to your group. If you've watched our How to Get Better at World of Warcraft video from a few days ago, then, you'll have an idea, right? Setting up Demonic Gateway properly, that will make you an invaluable asset to your group. Never mind, right? Having health stones, soul stones, curses, the ability to summon, and also an AoE stun, fear, and an interrupt. It's pretty nice. And also a strong set of defensives. I mean, as far as casters go, Warlock is a great pick for someone who wants to go above and beyond and truly become their class. Now that said, their lack of flexible mobility without spending their health, that can be an utter nightmare in day-to-day gameplay. It can suck an M+ and things like that, but if you're doing, instance gameplay and you're planning accordingly, then there's really nothing you can't solve with Demonic Circle and Gateway. They do lack some of the more interesting combat utility that other casters can bring to the table, yes, but if it was up to me, I wouldn't raid without at least one Warlock being around ever again. Just, if you're planning on being a Warlock, remember, it's not Mists of Pandaria, Kil'jaeden's Cunning, and all of its casting while moving still ain't there. So yes, Warlocks, they are pretty turrety. By the way, a new month, a new year, new Patreon loot. We're going a little bit more watercolor, a bit more landscape, and all tied together with this month's blacksmithing sort of loose theme. And of course, with that, you'll also get the sword pin, right? Beautiful, ornate sword pin. You'll get that too. So that's what's up for Patreon in January of this year. So patrons, thank you. And with that said, let's go. Let's talk about the Warlock. If you like spinning plates, then man, Affliction is made for you. The name of the game is juggling dots and debuffs on as many targets as you can, and then blowing them all away with Malefic Rapture. And at its baseline, right, what that means is agony, corruption, and one unstable affliction. Those are the dots you want to keep rolling. Now then, there is Shadow's Embrace to stack up, and the Covenant ability dots as well. And with the talents, that can add another 3 dots. Now, the final piece of the puzzle, which helps to just slot everything together, is your Spender, Malefic Rapture. And this is a new thing for this expansion. Basically, it hits everything affected and for more damage based on every dot that your targets have. So it's a simple enough premise, right? You dot them all up, you blast them down. And you know what? It is as satisfying as it sounds. Yeah, it's real fun. Dumping shards, your shards into Malefic Rapture and just watching mobs explode and seeing those damage numbers, it's a reward that feels well earned in gameplay. But also, it's not all sunshine and roses, No spec can make you feel like such an idiot when you start dropping your dots and, you're wasting shards, right? When you fail to spin plates, it all comes crashing down. So it really is one of those specs, right? Now, the real mastery comes from figuring out when to dot up and when to spend. Now, in single target, right, you usually have your work cut out for you because you need to keep all 5 rolling dots and 3 stacks of Shadow Embrace up, and then only spend soul shards whenever your cooldown dots come up. And that's easier said than done. Now, in AoE, deciding what to dot and when is a really big part of your gameplay. You can't keep all of your dots up on every single target, but you need some of them up for your Malefic Rapture to be useful, because its damage is based on the spreading of your dots, right? So that's when things like Seed of Corruption, your AoE corruption spreader, and then multi-dotting with Agony for shards is kind of your baseline gameplay. But then, using Unstable Affliction and Drain Soul to shard snipe, that can give just a real high skill cap to your multi-target fights. Pretty wild. Either way then, Affliction is either exciting and fun to play, or really stressful to play. Some people will not like that, some will. That basically means if you want to play a ranged DPS with a real high skill ceiling, then this is it. And because it is so based off, you've got dots you can sort of fill around with, yeah, moving feels a bit more okay in this one. So that's that. Let's do talents. So to get into the talents, your first row is modifying your kind of filler abilities, and that does matter thanks to Shadow Embrace. But basically, right, Drain Soul is just too good not to use. It allows for shard sniping and stacks Embrace faster, so that's a pretty big one. Now the next row is interesting. Absolute Corruption gives your corruption an infinite duration. Pretty wild. Or you can pick another dot entirely in Siphon Life. But in reality though, this is an AoE versus single target decision. But certainly picking Absolute Corruption can make a lot of your gameplay a lot more manageable, because you put Corruption on and bam, you don't need to think about it. It lasts. Now the AoE choice is again more situational than anything else, but the options are fun. So Sow the Seeds has Seed of Corruption replace Rapture in grouped AoE from some, just some old school Affliction explosions, right? So you'll know what that is if you played it. Now the other two options are dots on cooldown for different situations. There's then also Haunt, which adds just basically more to keep up in a single target situation. And the alternative then is to reduce Dark Glare, a 3-minute CD, to a 2-minute CD, which is important actually, because it does let it line up with Dark Soul Misery, which is a talented 30% haste cooldown. Yeah, 30% haste. You line those two up, you're doing some real big burst. Now they've also got Soul Conduit to refund shards if consistency in your damage is a bit more important to you. Now then, the utility and defensive talents, those are, they're shared across all specs basically, and they are very strong. Warlocks can move with Gateway, and they can also use Circle if they plan correctly. But otherwise, they are a slow bunch, right? Warlocks ain't speedy. Now picking then Burning Rush can alleviate that, but obviously at the cost of health. Now, if you'd rather maybe stand still and survive anyway, you do have Dark Pact. It's a very big shield. It eats up 20% of your current HP to use, but it's a real big absorb shield. Now, you basically get an extra health bar every 1 minute that lasts for 20 seconds. You combine that then with Mortal Coil, which horrifies the target and heals you for 20% on a 45-second cooldown. And I mean, you'll know it if you've PvP'd against a Warlock. They can be built to be extremely, extremely tanky. Legendary time. On the Legos, there's actually not that much to write home about. The accepted best general use legendary Relic of Demonic Synergy is boring. It's just an RPPM proc of extra damage for you and your pet. You're not going to notice it. Perpetual Agony then increases the shard generation from Agony, which of course will result in you being able to use Malefic Rapture a bit more often, which is quite ideal for those, the big AoE damage. Now, the fun single target legendary is Malefic Wrath, but it's a little difficult to optimize. Basically, you don't get much gain from it. Now, with it, Rapture changes from being a dump spell to an upkeep one, because it actually, with this, will stack a damage increase for your filler. So pretty different way to play. Now they've also then got Sacrilash, which is returning from Legion, and that will buff corruption damage and give it a 50% slow, which is quite amazing when needed, but otherwise, yes, is quite niche. So there's your Legos. Alright, let's boil all of this down into the strengths and weaknesses. And as far as the strengths go, right, Afflocks are very strong right now because of their skill ceiling. They can do a lot more damage than the other specs, and really with few downsides, right? They're quite mobile because they do a lot of dot refreshes, which are often instant. They're fairly flexible with their builds. They've got a high skill ceiling, so you can get a lot out of them, and they can drop some pretty major AoE burst on demand. And that means they're real strong right now. Now, they're not without their weaknesses, right? Their mobility does require planning because, you can easily drop some Embrace stacks or some dots if you move at the wrong time. Then you won't be able to do that big, crispy Malefic Rapture. It's also very easy to have a cascading failure on Affliction too, because, you know, once you start to drop those plates you've been spinning, it does take you a bit of time to recover and get everything lined up again. And then their biggest weakness, of course, is ramp up time, right? When mobs have low health, it can be frustrating, as even a basic setup on 3 mobs requires 6 to 7 casts before you can start to do reasonable damage, because, I mean, yeah, it is all about spreading dots, right? Overall, though, it is hard to go wrong with the Affliction, right? I mean, as a Warlock, you know, it's really fun, it's only got a few weaknesses, and it does feel really, really awesome when you get good at it. So if you enjoy that multi-dotting gameplay, this is an awesome, awesome spec that will very likely suit you very well. It also does help that right now it is tuned pretty damn high, so I would maybe expect some nerfs to happen, but overall, Affliction, to me, it does get a big thumb up. I really like what they've done with it in Shadowlands. Alright, with the very solid, you could maybe even say flavor of the month picked on, let's talk about Demonology WARLOCK. This is one of the more contentious reworks of the Legion expansion, and it does kind of feel, you know, like the red-headed stepchild of the ranged DPS, because it just struggles to fit in sometimes. It's also the spec that, you know, the Demon Hunter straight up stole from. That's a sticking point from what? Demo is, all things considered, a pretty niche spec, but it does have a unique fantasy that a lot of people do love. And if I'm sitting down on a target dummy, I do love it too. It's just the realistic scenarios. Now, as you can imagine, Demonology is, well, used to be you becoming a demon. It's now about summoning in demons, and lots of them. So at its core, it's all about keeping your summons on cooldown and then getting as many imps out as is possible from Hand of Gul'dan. And depending on your build, right, this can only be, you know, a few summons and a lot of imps, or you could have a pretty damn long list of abilities with a lot of different cooldowns to keep using, so there can be quite a bit more. Now, the fun part of all of this, I would say, is soul shard generation and management. Your soul shards come from Shadow Bolts and Demon Bolt. Demon Bolt is basically the Warlock Pyroblast, I'd say. Now, when your imps from Hand of Gul'dan expire, right, whenever they die, because they don't last forever, they have a chance, right, to grant you Demonic Core. Now, this can make your next Demon Bolt instant, and you can store up to 4 of these at once to bank up your resources. So whenever it's time to burn those resources, bam, 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 you're just firing out those Demon Bolts, and it's pretty cool. And that's the fundamental core of Demonology, having shards when you need them. At a basic level, if you don't have the resources to summon in your Dreadstalkers or the Vile Fiend when they're available, then you're wasting valuable uptime. Now, the most exciting part of this spec is its cooldown usage. I'd say it's really what a lot of it's built around. In most situations, right, the mastery of a demo lock comes from using Demonic Tyrant properly. Now, Demonic Tyrant, that is your main cooldown, and it's up every 90 seconds, which is pretty damn frequent, and it summons in this big Demonic Commander. Now, this Demonic Commander will extend and buff the duration of all of your already summoned demons and fill up your shards. Pretty good. Now, that means that you want to have as many active demons as you possibly can, a big host of demons, and then you bring the Tyrant in, and you just sort of line up all your cooldowns, and then you dump your Demonic Core stacks for all of those instant Demon Bolts. And oh man, whenever your Tyrant comes up, your boys are, they're all buffed up, you're flinging out your Demonic Cores. Whenever that stuff's lining up, it's a pretty damn awesome moment, right? And you just have this veritable army that is doing the work for you. All this damage is just appearing. Or if you're in AoE, you'll be, asking politely your imps to go in and detonate themselves via implosion. And that can be quite satisfying too. And really, it's that feeling of setup and payoff that is engaging, and it does set up a real nice rhythm. But sadly, it's the off moments, it's when this is a more boring spec. And that's the thing. It lines up for a beautiful moment whenever all the things come together, but your sort of second-to-second gameplay can be boring. And that's another thing I should mention here. You're summoning in demons. Those demons are doing the damage for you, and that does mean you're a pet class. That can feel a lot worse to people than just throwing out a humongous Chaos Bolt or a big meaty weapon swing. yeah, you got your wee lads doing the work for you, and that just means it's a pet class. It's going to feel pretty different to the old demo. Talent time. Okay, the talents are where things just get a bit more complicated with this one. Most abilities have a use case, which is actually a real win for this spec. In the first row of talents, you have a choice between basically which flavor of AoE you want. Dreadlash to passively boost your Dreadstalkers, Bile Scourge Bombers to have a little AoE nuke every 30 seconds, or Demonic Strength to give your Felguard a big whirlwind every minute. Now, given they're fairly similar in strength here, the real difference is just, the timings of these abilities and how they will fit. This then sets the stage for the rest of the talents, so let's talk about them. You can have extra demons via Summon Vile Fiend and Grimoire Felguard. Of course, more demons will mean more, basically it'll buff up your Demonic Tyrant, right, because you have more demons out. Or you could pick Soul Strike and Soul Conduit in order to generate more shards to spend on more imps. Now, then there's Nether Portal. This is a pretty wild option. It's a big 3-minute cooldown that adds even more demons to the spec. But as cool as it is usually overshadowed by Demonic Consumption. Now, Demonic Consumption has your Tyrant actually eat the health of your existing demons to get stronger. Overall, a bit weak, and nothing that really elevates the spec's gameplay. It's just kind of talents that add just kind of more stuff to do, which, does sound odd. There's a lot of times we'd say that and it would be quite positive. I'd say with this one, it's just a bit mixed, but basically you do have a few different options for your gameplay within their talents. But with that said, let's talk about the Legos. So this is a nice one because unlike most specs in the game, Demonology actually has a decent choice of legendaries. So you've got Forces of the Horned Nightmare, which is a passive. It gives your Hand of Gul'dan a chance to double cast, which adds, little to the gameplay, but can, speed the spec up quite nicely because you'll get more demonic cores because more imps have came out. We've then got Synergy, everyone's favorite business term, and also a cross-spec legendary that buffs basically both Warlock and its main pet by a bit. So it's kind of nice for just a one-size-fits-all option. Then moving on, if the 90-second timing of Demonic Tyrant doesn't work out, just go with Wilfrid's Sigil, which can reduce it to around 60 seconds instead, which is pretty major because, yes, cooldown windows are hugely important for this spec. Now, specifically for Mythic Plus, we've then got the Azerite trait that broke Demo Warlocks a while back, Implosive Potential. Now, this gives you a ton of haste when sacrificing imps in AoE, right? Now, that's pretty major. It works real well in AoE, where there constantly are lots of AoE situations, so it's pretty sweet there. So all in all here, there's actually some pretty decent customization and choice. But with that said, let's move on to the strengths and the weaknesses. For all the cool stuff we've said, Demonology has its ups and its downs. Their big burst window lining up every 90 seconds instead of the more usual 2 minutes, that can be a real strength based on some fight timings, and they do quite well in, both single target and cleave with similar build setups. They can also be pretty mobile depending on what talent setup they're running as well. Right? So this stuff all does seem pretty good. And I'd also then consider their unique flavor a strength as well. Finishing off an enemy and then starting the next pull with a big amount of summoned in, like imps and dudes, that is kind of cool. But we have to be real with the weaknesses, right? They are hurt by ramp up time and a big reliance on a pretty short burst window. And much like Affliction, their playstyle, it does feel like you're setting things up and you're knocking them down, but I do not feel that they have the flexibility that Affliction is able to bring to the table. Now, thankfully, their setup doesn't rely on specific mobs surviving, because rather than spread things around your enemies, you're building up, all of your demons. But it can be quite frustrating when, you've only just got all your demons up, and you look at the pack you're fighting, you realize, damn, they're all dead. So at the end of the day, right, these guys ain't Affliction, and in a way, that's one of their larger drawbacks. There's just not that much of a reason to play Demonology right now by comparison. but it is worth saying it's a simple enough and actually quite functional spec. I don't get the sense that it's the most widely played spec in the world. That is certainly the case, but it can work. But it also just does have some Warlock-ish, issues in just the usual things, right, that Warlocks sort of deal with. So it's sitting there with not a humongous amount of unique advantages, really unique ones to it. It's got two other specs. Destro's had its issues in balance, but, with Affliction, right, you just have a lot more flexibility, you can get a lot more done. So maybe this one does need a little bit more love and some tweaks from Blizzard, even though I will say, if I just hop on and play this in isolation, I will actually have quite a bit of fun with it. Alright, Destruction. We all know what it's about. Chaos Bolts. They're awesome. And I don't know if there's a spell in the game that feels as good as a big Chaos Bolt, especially when they're cleaved with Havoc. How cool is that? Destro, right? It's all about building up your soul shards to use your Chaos Bolts, preferably with, of course, backdraft charges, all while keeping up your immolates. Pretty cool. And it's a bit more complicated in practice, but overall it is a pretty damn simple premise. The complications, though, come from, of course, correctly banking up your resources and doing it all right. Now, those resources, of course, are soul shards, as usual, and Conflagrate, an instant cast generator spell with 2 charges and a short CD. Now, it also gives you a stack of Backdraft, which speeds up your next Chaos Bolt or Incinerate by 30%. So really, juggling which resources are available without wasting Backdraft or shards is step 1 of playing it right. Step 2 then is Chaos Bolts at the right time. Havoc will duplicate single target spells to a second target for 60% damage, and it lasts for 10 seconds every 30 seconds. So the key here is getting your Chaos Bolts sped up by Backdraft into that Havoc window, so you're just cleaving off these duos of Chaos Bolts. It's so cool. I mean, just look at the footage, it's so cool. Now it is decently easier to get to grips with than the other 2 specs, I would say. But really, it's hard to overstate just how much fun it is to pump Chaos Bolts into a target. Now, in AoE, they're less interesting, right? They just replace Chaos Bolt with Rain of Fire once they're fighting a certain number of targets, although using Havoc to increase shard generation is a pretty cool interaction that does exist. Now, this can be a nightmare, of course, if, Rain is the big thing for your AoE, and then, oh dear, your enemies move out of your Rain. Now, their major cooldown then, Summon Infernal, is up every 3 minutes, which, it's a long enough CD, and by default, all it does is generate some shards over time and does some decent AoE damage. Now, timing it with the rest of your resources for huge damages is really the only consideration there, right? So, simple enough overall. And I'd say that as an overall experience, Destro versus the other 2 is a lot less about spinning plates and setup, and that does mean that it feels a bit more direct, a bit more simple, and a bit more relaxing to play, in my opinion. It is just hard to overstate, really, how much fun it is to blow things up with Chaos Bolt, and that's always been the cool part of the Destro lock. Okay, let's talk about talents, because on talents, they've got some good ones, but not a lot of choice, because of balance. Most of the best talents double down on existing mechanics, right? Spells like Soulfire and Shadowburn, those are great additions to the gameplay if you're just a player who wants some more spells, but most people do just prefer options that smooth out the spec more. Taking Flashover for extra backdraft charges, or Reverse Entropy for a 15% haste proc. In practice, that often just feels better. Then Internal Combustion is a fun one. Chaos Bolt, with it, will consume some of Immolate's duration to do extra damage. And that can actually help, basically help Immolate upkeep, just be a bit more of an engaging thing in a single target scenario. So it's a bit more fun, right? A bit more interaction. Now, for the others, the choice is essentially down to damage profile rather than preference, right? Cataclysm, it's a fun spell, it brings a lot of extra damage in 1 to 2 targets, but for sustained AoE, picking Inferno to buff Rain of Fire is just better, so you'll do that. Roaring Blaze adds a window of extra damage from non-Chaos Bolt spells for single target, but Reign of Chaos, as well as being a great RTS, allows for extra Infernals to be summoned, which is, pretty huge in AoE, right? Just more Infernals is good. Like with the other specs, it can then also pick between Soul Conduit or a big 2-minute cooldown. Again, double down on burst or get more consistent damage out, that's roughly your choice. Now these are all good options, but which one you take is really going to come down more to the fight than what you'd rather use, at least for a lot of people. Legendary time, and like with the other specs, legendaries are just to sort of pick what you need at the time situation. Relic of Demonic Synergy is strong here as well, and Wilfrid's, to reduce the Infernal cooldown can help if a 3-minute CD is too much. Now, the most fun one is Cinders. It gives Confragate another charge and reduces its cooldown by 3 seconds. Now, based on how much this spec actually does revolve around managing your backdraft charges, using Cinders actually speeds up the gameplay notably, and it just gives you a bit more to work with. So I think it's really fun and a great choice to have. And that's the main thing to say on the Legos. Okay, let's talk about strengths and weaknesses. Destro's strengths are, pretty clear. They've got huge burst, especially on 2-target cleave, and they've got very little ramp-up time. They can start a fight, all guns blazing, whether it's single target or AoE, and you know what? They're viscerally satisfying to watch, especially if you get that green fire. Their sustained AoE is also strong, and it's sustained with very little ramp, assuming targets don't move, so that can be good. But their weaknesses are, of course, in having some reliance on cooldowns and a lack of mobility. And this has seriously been an annoying thing for a lot of Warlocks, especially in situations like Mythic Plus. They've not been having as fun of a time, they've wanted more movement and things like that. And that's going to be an issue here. Across all specs, across all Warlock specs that is, Destro has the least freedom to move during combat because only Confragate is instant cast, and doing a full hardcast Chaos Bolt, that takes quite some time. And having one of those things be disrupted is a nightmare. People will want to stand in the fire to finish their cast if they're a Destro lock, come on. And that can suck. They're also prone to, bad tanks pulling mobs out of Rain of Fire, so they'll need to be careful on that one. So there's that, and then of course there also have been, balance issues. I don't know how the weekly balancing will be as of the time of publication. We'll flash it up. Blizzard have been changing a few things, but a lot of people have wanted to play this spec, and they've found themselves really feeling like they've had to play Affliction, which is of course the usual thing that happens if you play a triple DPS spec, and balance is just the way that balance can be sometimes. Okay, with all of that said about the specs, let's talk about the Covenants. This is an interesting one since 3 of them are dots. That obviously works especially well with Affliction because of Malefic Rapture, which does more damage when more dots are up. So the Kyrian one, Scouring Tithe, is a fairly long cooldown dot with a refund mechanic where if the target dies, it will fill up the Warlock shards. If the target lives though, then the cooldown is refreshed. That's obviously quite a bit of upkeep, and it's quite fun to min-max, but it can be just more trouble than it's worth, and it's got very little use in AoE. That said, the potential for, 100% uptime here is pretty big for Affliction. Then we've got the Night Phase Soul Rot. It's also it's got a fun element that's mostly overlooked. It applies a dot to multiple targets, and when it's up, drain life will be free, deal extra damage, and drain from all affected targets. Now, for Affliction, this is a nice extra dot for Malefic Rapture as well, and for the other two, it's free damage and a chance to get a lot of healing in an AoE scenario, which could be pretty damn nice. Now, the Venthyr's Impending Catastrophe is similar to Soul Rot, but with a different effect. It's a big AoE damage over time that also applies either Curse of Weakness or Curse of Tongues to targets. That's potentially, right, very strong to deal with difficult Mythic Plus packs, but it's not massively useful outside of that. We then, of course, move on to the Necrolord one. It's the one that's not dot, right? It's called Decimating Bolt, and it increases the damage of your next few Shadow Bolts, Demon Bolts, or Incinerates. Now, that increase goes up with lower enemy health, so it has the potential, right, for Demo and Destro to basically, be in an execute phase, but it's a bit lackluster otherwise. Overall, then, where are we? Well, I'll say this. In general, Night Fae is pretty much best across the board, thanks to the Soul Binds. That's what's ended up happening, and also Soul Rot and Soul Shape. I mean, Soul Shape is really nice when you're a Warlock and you just have mobility problems, right? If you can't get your teleport set up, then it's nice having Soul Shape as a get out of jail free card. And when you're that movement limited, things like that actually factor in quite a bit. Okay, the verdict. I'll say this. All of these specs, in my view, are very, very fun for their own reasons. And I love them from a design perspective. Now, we went too hard on this in our very first bit of Warlock coverage. I mean, you'll remember that. There was a bunch of down clicks, we realized we messed up a bit, and we made a second video that was just a little bit more speaking to the concerns and stuff of the Warlock community. So I'm in that situation where I look at the gameplay and I think, man, the rotations, the just stuff for these specs is really fun and well designed. But you do actually have to deal with the weaknesses and the things like the movement, and that can be very frustrating to many players. Now that said, if you're okay to be a bit more turrety, right, with, Demo, I suppose, or Destro, if you're okay to be a bit more turrety, or, you're okay to be spinning plates with Affliction, then you can have a really great time. You can just unlock, I think, the really fun gameplay of these specs. But then there's a problem. And this is what we sort of call the pure DPS problem. One spec is king sometimes. Maybe it lasts for a tier, maybe for an expansion, right? I mean, remember what happened to sub-rogues at the end of fighting, who was it? Remember the sub-rogues in BFA? They were mega strong, and then they were, their AoE was nerfed into the ground, and you just had that sort of thing where if you love the sub-rogue, well, tough, you can't, it's just not going to do well into the future. You get the same problem here, right? Where right now, Affliction Warlock is really, really, really good. It is top of those meters. It's so strong. And that can mean for so many people that if you don't play Affliction, you're going to have people asking you, why don't you play Affliction? You are choosing the wrong spec. You're bringing the group's DPS down. You're not being a good team player. You could get those things. Now, if you're playing in a normal raid group, right, normal difficulty, and there's no pressure, and your team's not having DPS issues or anything like that, then sure, you'll be a lot more free to do what you want. But if you're going to be doing pugs, or in a very performance-oriented place, you've got 3 specs, and if the difference in throughput between them is as big as it is, say, between, I believe, Destro and Aff, man, you're going to feel like you got to play Aff, and that's going to be the thing right now. Now, for us, right, the team putting this video together, me and Matt, we both love the Aff lock, and we love multi-dotting. So, of course, we're going to have a great time with this. But you're just in that weird situation right now where if you really want to play a Warlock, yeah, the other 2 specs are really, really great, but you got to be prepared to play Afflock, or at least be asked to, in a realistic scenario. Now, of course, this will change. Blizzard have been doing flat percentage damage based tuning for the game lately, so, there could be a more balanced situation. And if I was to say that if we were in a perfectly balanced situation, then in this class, you get 3 very, very different, and I think very fun specs to play. Obviously, those great strengths do come with weaknesses, like things like movement, but again, that's just something you can kind of deal with, right? Get good at using your portal and your gateway. Okay, that's it. We've played a lot of Warlock. We've talked about Warlock for a long time. We have spent, we have spent ages with each other, so I hope you found this interesting. If you want just a little bit more, color, a bit more texture to the Warlock, hopefully to allow you to learn, right? Make your choices. If you're interested in the Marksmanship or Beast Mastery Hunter, or you're interested in the Paladin, then those are the other parts of the class review that we've done. Of course, there will be more. I'm thinking the next one's going to be me picking up the Priest, because I know I love Disc, and I know that Shadow Priest rework that Chris Kalecki worked on before he left Blizzard, well man, it's a really cool revamp. That's it for me. Have a great day. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.